Golden Black Live. We're going to start with a moment of silence for Colin Hartman. Okay, we're done with it. Colin, that was a rough one John Octius put on you last night. Purdue, Brian, an all-timer, really, if you have to put it that way. The Boilermakers win at Indiana last night in dramatic fashion, and I don't know what else to say except for it was a really phenomenal basketball game for Purdue.
Yeah, I have no idea what to do with my hands now that my laptop's moved off to the side, so you have to apologize. I thought what you saw from Purdue last night was mental and physical toughness on the road that you had not previously seen this season from them. When you look at how they matched up with Indiana, I thought the tougher team in all of toughness forms won last night. I think it's a good matchup for Purdue with Indiana, but I think this was more about Purdue's maturation and the fact that as good as Purdue has been this Big Ten season, they're getting better because you did not see the poise and the resolve and the mettle that you saw in the last 2.5 minutes of that game last night, that you saw at Minnesota, at Illinois. And I said this on my rap video last night. I don't know if this makes sense, but I thought that if Purdue had just held on to its 8-point lead and won, that win wouldn't have been as impressive as it was with them losing their lead there at the end and coming back without John Octius on the floor and still winning that game. I just thought you saw incredible toughness from Purdue last night, incredible mental fortitude, and all of those sort of things. Yeah. Two
of 18 from three, and the fact that happens and you win the game. And you're right, the point, when it got to 8-10, it really looked at that time that Purdue, I wouldn't say, you're never smooth sailing at Assembly Hall, but you felt like that point Purdue was really in good shape because they're completely dominating things at that point.
Yeah, but at the same time, the way Indiana is capable of shooting the basketball, even when they were up 8, you kind of figured there was going to be some sort of run.
Oh, yeah, and they always do.
What Purdue had to do was keep scoring, and that's the exact opposite of what Purdue did. They went forever without a field goal until they absolutely had to come up with some points. That's when I think John Octius got a transition bucket. They got Hammonds a bucket around the basket. Then obviously Rayfeld Davis makes the 2 gigantic field goals to take the lead back and then to stretch it to 3. Purdue just made every play it had to make in the last couple minutes of the game. It made every shot it had to make. It got every stop it had to make, and it got every rebound it had to make, or get. Duh. And it made every free throw it had to make. So, just what I said before, toughness in all its forms just kind of rose to the top last night when it absolutely had to.
Okay, if you're new to this show and how this show works, it's Golden Black Live, you know that. But if you have questions for us, Gordon will be taking them. We already have some questions for John Shoup, who will be joining us in segments 2 and 3 today. But there's going to be a lot of basketball questions out there as well. Also want to thank our sponsors, Hilton Garden Inn, when tomorrow's a big day, State HGI tonight, Triple X. On the hill but on the level, a Purdue tradition since 1929. Basham Reynolds, John Basham, and is about as big a Purdue basketball fan as you can get. Maybe Trent Johnson is a close second. Trent Johnson, trentismyagent.com. And I think the interesting thing was, at least from the collective Purdue fandom, Boilermaker Nation, whatever you want to call it, those that have gotten on the coach from time to time with the inability to execute plays down the stretch, I thought that the play that the out-of-bounds play to Rayfeld Davis and that subsequent layup was about as good a design as you could get.
It was absolutely perfect. I mean, it was the perfect call at the perfect time. You drew their attention to A.J. Hammonds where you knew their attention was going to be. You probably hit them quick when they figured you were going to run a little bit more clock to try to get the ball inside or to work the ball around the perimeter, get the best shot you could. Purdue hit them quick. It was a great play design. It was a great call, but you have to give the players the credit, too, because Rayfeld Davis made a hell of a shot.
Yeah, he did, and made a great drive to the basket. All right, we talked off the air, and a question we're going to get on the top of everybody's mind. Everybody's taking a sigh of relief and say, oh, Purdue's in the NCAA tournament. A dangerous thing to say just yet because there are still games to be played.
Yeah, Purdue's not in yet. They're this close right now. I think last night's win filled a huge void in their resume. Yeah. It's a quality road win over an NCAA tournament opponent. Purdue did not have a road win over anybody who could walk and chew bubblegum at the same time this season. So I thought last night's win was the sort of win they absolutely had to have before the end of the year. This gives them wiggle room now where if you lose to both Ohio State and Michigan State on the road, it doesn't absolutely kill you, assuming you win your home games. But Purdue's still got work to do. Obviously, everybody on the bubble is going to have warts, and Purdue's got real gigantic warts, giant lesions actually on its resume because of the North Florida Gardner-Webb losses and what's now becoming a bad Minnesota loss. The Vanderbilt loss isn't great either. But the great thing about the NCAA tournament, when you look at this sort of process, the human element looms large. And the human element in that committee room is going to look at Purdue's resume, and they're going to look at Purdue the way it's playing now, and they're going to see two entirely different teams. And there's not a person on this planet right now who knows the first thing about basketball who would look at the way Purdue's played for the last 10, 11 games and say that's not an NCAA tournament team. And provided Purdue doesn't completely fall all over itself here in the last 4 games, I think it's got a really, really good shot to be in.
Yeah, I was really.
It should be in because it's an absolute positively NCAA tournament team if there ever was one.
Yeah, and I really was prepared to say that last night, even had the Boilermakers lost, just because, again, they were playing like a NCAA tournament team without question. Questions for Brian. Nice to see you made it out of the press conference without any physical scars. That looked to be a feisty crowd from the post-game videos. Comment from Rick. How was that crowd in Bloomington last night, from what you could tell?
The crowd or the press conference? The
Well,
press
both.
conference was eventful. It was a lot of people in a very confined space with a lot of questions to ask very few people. So mix all that together, and you have a lot of people shouting over one another and a lot of players not knowing who to respond to. But I won more than I lost, so I got my 3 questions in, or however many it was.
Yeah.
I could have asked 20. I got in my 3, so I won more than I lost. So.
John
Can't complain.
Octius, I thought, had a great comment about it, and I'm trying to recall it now because I saw a video about it today, and about his dunk, or about having to take at least 1/2 count to celebrate his dunk. That was a pretty special play.
It was incredible. I had a really good angle. It was the one thing about that game, given where I was seated, that I had a good look at. Everything else was like, well, I'm going to have to watch it later to see what the hell just happened. But the Octius dunk happened right in front of me, and I was exactly like Matt Painter. Painter said he didn't know what he was doing when he drove into the lane, and then it's like, oh, well, it was the same thing for me. All of a sudden, I look up, and here's this condor flying through the sky and just destroying Colin Hartman. I kind of felt bad for Colin Hartman a little bit. But yes, John Octius did celebrate. A.J. Hammonds later celebrated and got a technical foul, and it just kind of reminds again, what are we doing here, college basketball? Are we taking all the emotion and all the fun out of a kid's game here? Do you mean to tell me, really, that you're going to ask a team to go into that sort of environment and play with no personality, play with no swagger, play with no ability to react from a visceral standpoint, no ability to have fun? You have to play the game with complete reverence to everything and just be a soulless, emotionless husk. That is nonsense, and that was one of the worst technical foul calls I've ever seen.
Yeah, and even watching it
It
on
could have changed the game.
Yeah, well, it definitely could have, and nearly did. Watched it on TV. You know, they showed it from about 12 different angles, and you know, boy, A.J. Hammonds, it's hard to imagine him being a guy that's going to be too much in your face. He's been doing more of that of late, but it was just such an emotional thing. And really, I thought Octius is arguably his 1 count stop could have been the same thing. The only thing is Octius, I don't think, said anything, or if he did.
I think what might have been going on is I think Hammonds and Hunter Perea might have been chatting a little bit during the game.
Were.
So I think perhaps the ref wanted to make an example of somebody, but I mean,
come on,
that's a time in the game where you could have decided the outcome of the game on that play, because that was 2 point. That took away a basket from Purdue essentially, because it gave them the free throws to make up for it. Indiana turns the ball over on the ensuing possession,
Right,
but if
right.
Indiana scores on that possession, it's a 2-point game with a long time to go, and it was a big momentum play for Purdue, the dunk, and then it was a big momentum play for Indiana to just basically have that wiped off the board. So it's just, what are we doing?
Yeah. No doubt on that. It was good, but a phenomenal basketball game. And even if you were just a fan, just the opportunity. There were so many plays last night during an important run midway through the second half where, you know, Purdue would work the ball in, get the ball in for a dunk, and then all of a sudden Indiana would be down the court and running before A.J. Hammonds could catch him, literally.
Yeah.
It was just really good basketball from that standpoint, and the emotion of it all makes it a special game.
The yin and yang of these two teams was really, I don't want to say it was fun to watch, because obviously one side won both games and dominated one of the games, but the way Purdue was able to match up defensively with an opponent that's really, really difficult to play against. When they start doing all their Harlem Globetrotter stuff, where Yogi Ferrell drives in the lane, you know, turns into the Roadrunner, you know, dribbles through the rim, spins around, kicks the ball out to a shooter. That shooter pump fakes drives, and everybody's scrambling like their hair's on fire. That's a really difficult offense to guard, and Purdue did a really good job in 2 games guarding it. As good a job as you can probably expect anybody to. Part of that is Purdue's got tough kids. Indiana's got a lot of soft kids. Other than Yogi Ferrell, I don't think they've got a lot of toughness on that team. There's guys who just aren't very tough who play for Indiana, who you can take out of the game a little bit if you beat up on them. James Blackman, Troy Williams, perhaps a little bit. I'm not trashing them. I'm just trying
talented, but yeah.
Very, very talented,
No
but
question.
maybe not as
Maybe they're
mentally and physically
right.
tough as Purdue is. You know, that's a good rebounding team, too. Indiana has no size at all, but they are a good rebounding team for their size. And Purdue just destroyed them on the boards last night. That was the single biggest factor in this game outside of Purdue's defense, because they got out-rebounded in Mackey Arena by a team with absolutely no size. Size is only part of rebounding.
Yeah.
People don't always realize that.
Well, long rebounds, too, on those missed three-pointers.
Right.
Provides a lot of offensive rebounds.
You got a lot of quickness on the perimeter
Yeah.
for Indiana. Purdue was able to cut off a lot of those offensive rebounds, and that really, really, really helped them.
Lots of questions. Somebody asked us for a fist pump, a Taylor Stubblefield-style fist pump for the big win. I think you've got our moment of silence. That's as far as we're going with that today, though. If you want to do that in your living room or wherever or your office, please do if you're a Purdue fan. Another question, I thought it kind of an interesting question from Rick. Obviously, Frank Kaminsky is going to be first-team All-Big Ten. Wouldn't it seem silly to leave A.J. Hammonds off that team just because they play the same position?
Easy answer.
Yeah, they don't think they pick 5
You
guys
don't
anyway.
vote by position. You vote for the 5 best players. And I have a vote, and A.J. Hammonds is on my first team. It's not even close right now. If it were by center, even if it were by center, I think you might even put some thought into it if you're really paying attention, because A.J. Hammonds, my personal opinion, impacts games in more ways than Frank Kaminsky might. I know that's a really, really bold thing to say.
One.
Frank Kaminsky might be the best player in the country,
Yeah.
but does Frank Kaminsky protect the rim the way A.J. Hammonds does?
Does different stuff.
He does different stuff, but when you look at the 2 IU games in particular, A.J. Hammonds completely changed the game.
Yeah. Yeah, he definitely did, and that is no hard to argue that one. It'll be interesting to see who makes that first team All Big Ten team just down the line, because, or let's say who makes the. I think they still do 3 teams for basketball. I'm not 100% sure, because I think there was a time that Ray Davis could be in that conversation. Certainly a time where John Octius, I'm talking 3 teams, not first, but would be in that conversation as well.
I mean, if we're talking
top 15
postseason honors, if the season ended today, A.J. Hammonds on my first team, Rayfeld Davis might be on my second team, and John Octius might be on my third team, because, you know, the way it always goes is you always reward winning, and Purdue's won.
Yeah.
And, you know, you're also looking at some other stuff, like, you know, probably Vince Edwards being on that All Big Ten freshman team. You got 3 locks right now in D'Angelo Russell, James Blackman, and Melo Trimble.
Right.
There's 2 more spots there. Vince Edwards has to be in the driver's seat for one of them. You got to look at Big Ten Coach of the Year, too. But obviously there's a lot of basketball left to be played. If Purdue closes strong, you're going to see Purdue get a lot of postseason honors.
Yeah, it certainly is a part-time in the season where you start to look at this and evaluate that, and maybe, just maybe from a Purdue perspective, that those losses to Gardner-Webb in North Florida can at least be a little bit further pushed into the rearview mirror. From last night's win, did it make up for one of the bad losses? Last night's game made up for kind of repeat question. I think it does. From an NCAA resume standpoint. But again, you know, you have to remember, too, that you have to play games. I mean, I don't think I think in a lot of ways, I said earlier, the show was on earlier this morning, about the fact that Purdue might not be a bad time for a bye, just because there can be hangovers after you beat Indiana, and Purdue can kind of reload, get a little bit of rest. In theory, have a game that they should be able to control next Thursday against Rutgers, and maybe start to at least use this time of year to kind of refresh itself.
Yeah.
Do you buy that theory?
Well, what a great time to have Rutgers at home.
Yeah.
Because if there was ever going to be a letdown from an emotional standpoint, I think this team's done a really good job insulating itself from letdowns. You haven't seen it happen once since some of those losses in non-conference happened. During the Big Ten season, Purdue's been a rock from a stability standpoint, outside of brief moments in road games where they've fallen apart. But I think you have to give Rayfeld Davis a lot of credit for that. But if Purdue was playing again this weekend, what a perfect time to play Rutgers at home, because that's a game you almost physically cannot. It's almost physically impossible for Purdue to lose that game. And I know that sounds obnoxious, but I mean, come
Be
on.
tough. Be tough to lose that one.
It would be. You'd have to try to lose that game.
We've seen it happen, but it would not at this time of year, and not for a Purdue team.
Have you watched Rutgers?
I have, but I didn't see him in person. But I
well,
did see him.
I have.
Yeah, and you did. So.
And I want to wipe my mind
Yeah,
because of it.
no, I'm with you on that. I used to say that there were 14 teams in the conference that were difficult. There are really 13 at this point. Difference in the game was made free throws, and Purdue made them and Indiana didn't. That certainly was a huge factor. Purdue hitting 17 of 21, I believe it was. And I thought Isaac Haas, hitting 6 free throws just for so many reasons. One, his own confidence. I mean, he's really struggled in the offensive end. He struggled some yesterday as well, but is it as simple to say that was as big a part of the reason why the Boilermakers won was that they did? Is that just part of that clutch notion?
I would point to rebounding above all else. Purdue destroyed Indiana on the boards yesterday, and if you give up a few more second chances here and there, all of a sudden it's an entirely different game. As for Isaac Haas and A.J. Hammonds both, I thought Purdue did an unbelievable job with its entry passing last night. I don't remember too many turnovers on post feeds. There might have been 1 or 2, but Purdue commits 15 turnovers, and I don't think a lot of them were of the post-entry variety, and that's where you put yourself most at risk oftentimes, especially against a smaller opponent that's going to crowd the post and run all sorts of different zones. I thought Purdue did an exceptional job last night getting the ball to its big men in position to score easily, to make quick, decisive moves to the basket and score. And then you have to give the 2 big men credit for finishing. I think Isaac Haas was actually only 3 of 9, but he had a lot of balls
3 of 9 from
the field.
Yeah.
There were a lot of shots where Isaac Haas missed, rebounded it, so his field goal percentage is a little deceptive. A.J. Hammonds is 8 of 9, but both of those guys between them were almost flawless at the free throw line.
Yeah,
for Isaac Haas to go 6 of 6 on the road with those gigantic heads, somebody on Twitter said maybe he felt a little more comfortable because those giant heads perhaps made him feel like he was
at home.
He was kind of among his own. But both those guys at the offensive end did a really, really good job from an efficiency standpoint.
One of the things that's good about winning a big game like this is we get just tons of questions today, which is great, and we appreciate that very much. Has this Big Ten season, Brian, for Purdue been just as or even more surprising? And I think he means the 2008 season, the 2008 conference season. In your perspective, obviously that team finished second in the league, had a chance at the last week to win the Big Ten championship when Rob Hummel and E'Twaun Moore and Juwan Johnson, Scott Martin were all freshmen. How do you view that? Is there a comparison? I don't see a direct comparison.
There is a comparison, I guess, but I think this season has been more of a surprise just because Purdue dipped to a lower point than that team ever did. Yes, that team lost to Wofford, yes, but they didn't lose 3 games in a row right before conference play started and give up 80 points a game doing it, and then all of a sudden overnight morph into one of the best defensive teams, not only in the Big Ten, but from a field goal efficiency standpoint defensively, one of the tougher teams probably in college basketball. In terms of parallels between those 2 teams, I think the big X factor, for lack of a better term, I don't know exactly what an X factor is, but it seems like an appropriate term. I think the big X factor with this team over that one was A.J. Hammonds. You just had such an enigmatic dude coming into this year. You just never knew what to expect, but you knew that if he ever figured it out, you'd have a chance to be really good. I thought with that team before, it was all young guys, and they were just better than everybody thought they'd be. This was a matter of young guys being better than we thought they'd be, combined with a guy where you never knew he was going to figure it out, and then he just did. And to an extent, as crazy as this sounds, Purdue's still underachieving a little bit because they can't make a jump shot, and their whole philosophy the last couple of years in recruiting was to be able to make jump shots. They almost overcorrected on their jump shooting deficiencies. And still, they can't make a jump shot. And that still represents upside in this team.
Yeah, and Ryan Klein, he'll change that next year, I guarantee it. No, that's been an interesting phenomenon. Last question we have time for. Where did Dakota go in the second half last night? Dakota Mathias was on the bench for a fair amount of the second half, having a hard time shooting the ball, though he did make a huge basket inside. Stevens was still not shooting well, but Coach Painter kept him in though I didn't see much different from the 2 intangibles. Was there any comment about that post game?
Kendall Stevens is Purdue's best entry passer.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any question about that. He is Purdue's best guy at feeding the post. And I thought he did a really good job passing the basketball yesterday. I think his length helps them. I think even if he's not shooting well, I think everybody knows who he is, and I think they still guard him. When you look at the quick hitter Purdue ran on the bucket for Raphael Davis with 36 seconds
Yeah.
to go, they might have helped otherwise off of that, but they weren't going to leave Kendall Stevens. Kendall Stevens could shoot 10% for the year from three-point range, and he's probably getting pretty close to it here.
Yes,
Big
he
Ten
is.
play.
He's going in that direction.
But he's got a reputation, and when a guy's got a reputation, you don't believe the numbers more than you believe the reputation a lot of the time. So I think people are always going to guard Kendall Stevens. Dakota Mathias hasn't earned his stripes yet in the Big Ten, so people might be a little bit more inclined to back off of him. But I think probably the biggest factor in that is just how good of a job Kendall Stevens does feeding the post. Part of that has to do with his height. Part of it has to do with his length. Part of it has to do with he's a more experienced player than Dakota Mathias. As good as Dakota Mathias has been playing a floor game as a freshman in the Big
Yeah.
Ten, I still think Kendall Stevens has a little bit of an advantage on him from an experience standpoint and from a physical ability standpoint.
Yeah, in a game that you need everybody to do everything, the fact that Dakota Mathias hits an early three and hits that left-handed layup or left-handed move around that I thought was big. It takes a village if you're going to win, so to speak, in Bloomington. So the Boilermakers will have a few days off, or at least a few days without a game, and then we'll face Rutgers. Do you know what the practice schedule is? Are they off at all? Do you know what
All
it
I
is?
know is we have no availability until next week.
Yeah, so-
I'm sure they're practicing sometime in the next. They're not. I don't think they're practicing today.
Yeah.
But they'll probably return to practice tomorrow. I'd have to think. I don't know, so
Yeah.
don't quote me on that. But
All right. Well, we've gotten through all of our questions, and we'll look forward to talking more about Purdue basketball with Brian and others as we get. We'll probably have our bracketologist on starting next week as well as we get closer and closer to Selection Sunday. All right, we're going to take a short break and bring on offensive coordinator John Shoop, who is an excellent point guard in his days, so he'll be able to break down the Purdue-Indiana game as well. But we'll look forward to talking, obviously, Purdue football in that segment as well. So thanks, Brian, for joining us, and we'll look forward to more of the same, more Purdue basketball on the site, a lot more to come here in the next 40 minutes on Gold and Black Live. Stay tuned.